This is going to be a video response to Brutus Albion on Dark Matter 2525's recent video debate God versus Satan. There was a guy that seemed to really not get the concept that notX and Xnot are logically different. Let's see. It was in response to Turbo Micafy's original post. Oh, yeah, right here. And basically, Brutus's original claim was everyone's following their favorite church, implying that this YouTube channel is a church or something. And he got ratioed pretty good in the comments there. Not that that means anything. But he replied that OP, who had said, I find it hilarious and quite unsettling that I'm sitting in the guest bedroom of my grandparents' place while her and her husband are watching live streams of church in the living room. Brutus said, grandparents are listening to a channel promoting their ideology. This guy's technically no different. And then here's the thing he said. Atheism is still a belief, even if that belief is rejecting all other belief. And he said, your belief is based on faith that you have the correct answer by rejecting all other religions or ideologies. 32J said, no, that's a fallacious argument by someone that should have studied more and brainwashed less. A little bit of hope said, did you let Merriam-Webster know that you changed the definition of atheism? And I popped in and said, atheism is a belief. There's your problem. Just what belief would that be? What belief do you think atheism entails? I don't have any faith-based justifications for any of my beliefs. So I think perhaps you are projecting. If you're not, then you should be able to answer the question about the thing you said. And, let's see. There's quite a few responses in here that have been deleted. And you know how YouTube is. And he responded to me, what did he reply to me? I think there was a reply at me in here somewhere. Anyway, I'm like, hey, don't be a dodging Daniel, answer the question. Here's Neil Grimes, atheism is a lack of belief, not a belief. So Brutus finally gets back to me in response to, why won't you answer my question about what belief atheism entails? Does he answer my question? Nah. Brutus says, I clearly explained to you what belief atheism entails already. Perhaps you just need to read my comment again. And yeah, well, we read the comment. It still doesn't tell me what positive assertion he thinks I'm making. Unless he's thinking that I'm asserting that there are no gods. But that's an unfalsifiable claim. I wouldn't assert a claim that I know to be unfalsifiable. That's just silly. And here he responds to someone else, saying atheism is a lack of a belief, as that is the official dogma and canon of atheist belief. So I guess the belief is that atheism is a lack of a belief. And I mean, that technically is true, but that's just meta. So if he's acknowledging that, then he's acknowledging that atheism is a lack of a belief. As you believe that there is no belief, that is the scripture by which you live and by which you are convinced to be true and honest. It is your belief that there is a lack of belief. Alright, playing with words. Michael DeHaven says, guys, he appears to be in the mold of Jordan Peterson. God is almost certainly either something like your highest moral ideal or maybe even all consciousness for him. They basically just redefine words to have symbolic meaning, usually couched in religious language. Trying to speak to them requires building something like a translation matrix. I thought that was kind of funny, but I didn't necessarily get like hard Jordan Peterson vibes from this guy. Apparently he thought it was very funny too, because he said very funny. You know, that's a nice fanfic you wrote, right? You better not believe that, or you're actually believing in something that isn't true. which ironically would make you a believer of some sort of religious doctrine. Literally, technically, what he said here, he's equating something that isn't true with religious doctrine. So he did something kind of like that later on too, where he literally shoots himself in the foot, probably by accident, with his words, just countering what he's trying to say. Because I'm pretty sure he doesn't think that his religious doctrine is something that isn't true. And so a few hours go by, and I'm like, so since he didn't answer my question, I reply, so you folded like a lawn chair from that simple question. Nice. I'm assuming based on context, and don't accuse me of putting words in your mouth when you refuse to actually clarify when asked, that you think atheism entails a belief that the number of real gods is 0. That's simply not the case. And here's the point where I try to explain the logic to him. Say, not being convinced that proposition X is true does not imply that I'm convinced that proposition not X is true. You're simply failing at basic logic. I tell him if he disagrees, then give me an argument demonstrating how I'm supposed to believe that the number of galaxies in the universe is even, just because I'm not convinced that it's odd. But you can't. And I tell him that's why he didn't engage with the gumball analogy. Right, I think that was one of my first or one of my earliest posts where I gave him the gumball analogy. Like, you got a jar of gumballs. It's either an even or an odd number. You don't know which one. And just because you don't think it's even doesn't mean you necessarily think it's odd. It's entirely possible that you don't think it's even or odd. You don't have any reason to think it's one or the other. Clearly it is either one or the other, but if you don't have any way to know which, you just don't take a position on which. So I told him the only thing he's clearly demonstrated, to use his own word, is that he doesn't know the difference between Xnot and notX. So, like, Xnot would be like, I don't hold to the proposition that some God exists, where X is the proposition that some God exists, and not X would be the negation of X. So if X is the proposition that some God exists, not X would be no God exists, or some God does not exist. I'll tell him if he wants to learn what the difference between those things is, I can tell him all about it. But told him, please don't lie to me about me, because I'm not going to believe that. He's like, I folded? On what? You got some pretty big ego if you think I just folded. You need to be right because you're too afraid of being wrong. I'm like, bruh. Rectify here in the comments is like, hey, you're reminding me of Alex O'Connor because that's how he debates these topics. I can even hear his voice on your argument. Definitely love it. And that was kind of cool. I think Alex is a pretty sharp dude. Been watching him for about as long as there's been a YouTube. So I reply to Brutus. I say, so if you didn't fold like a lawn chair, what belief does atheism entail and how is it justified by faith? It's amazing how a question intended to clarify your own words is so terrifying to you. $5 as you continue to not answer. And, well, here's his response, and looks like he owes me $5. He says, look, let's prove it. Why don't you believe in Christ despite the multiple independent testimonies? So, rather than answering the question, he offers an unrelated question in turn. I told him if I and a couple other people in this thread told you I've got a fire-breathing invisible dragon in my garage, and flies around, eats sheep and nights, would you believe us? Because you shouldn't believe us. If you don't believe us, then you're an garage dragonist, the same way that I'm an atheist. I also asked him if he had a vitriolic emotional reaction when people express disagreement with him. That's unfortunately something I notice a lot with theists. A lot of them will sort of internalize their religious beliefs to the point that they just sort of subsume their personality so that it feels to them like any disagreement with the things that they believe is like a personal attack. And it's really unfortunate because it makes conversations quite difficult. And I like having these conversations. So I asked him, like, are you convinced that the number of galaxies in the universe is an even number? Yes or no, please. And he actually answers that question. He says, it is unknown. It could be that the universe is generating new galaxies every second, so even if I gave an answer, the correct answer would have changed by the time you'd read it. We simply do not have enough knowledge on the matter to make an informed decision either way. As though that matters. I'm just, coming up with a hypothetical number. A number that's not zero, so it must be either even or odd. Do you think this hypothetical number is even? But he does answer after that. He says, alright, so I guess the answer would be no, I am not convinced, because it is unknown. And then he asks in turn, if I told you I owned a red car, would you believe me? Yes or no, please? And I had a suspicion from the way interactions had already been with this guy so far that he probably doesn't own a red car. But let's see. I had a response here that YouTube deleted. So I replied again, you told me you were not convinced that the number of galaxies in the universe is an even number. Does that then mean that you're convinced that the number of galaxies in the universe is odd? Yes or no, please. We're almost there. It's like so close. And then here we go. This is where I'm like, he's finally going to get it. Like, does that mean you're convinced the number of galaxies is odd? He says, you already know the answer to that question. Why act smug about it? The answer is the same. Like, I'm not acting smug. I'm just using the Socratic method. I'm trying to, like, walk you by your hand through the logic I'm using by giving you a different situation where you're not using the biases that you were using in the one case, because you don't have any emotional attachment to, whether X is even or odd. But, so I basically explained to him, I'm just trying to use the Socratic method, like, either A is the case, or A is not the case. And if I don't know, then I don't take the position that it is or that it isn't. But if I don't take the position that it is, then I'm definitionally an atheist. And so after explaining the analogy, after he accepted that he doesn't think the number of galaxies is odd, nor that he thinks that the number of galaxies is even, after that he said, you really didn't prove anything. Let me show it. Like, here we go. Rejecting basic logic. He said, if I told you I own a red car, would you believe me? Yes or no, please? Like, I know this is a trap. It's going to be a trap either way, though. It's like, he probably doesn't own a red car. Where is he going with this? I'm like, I'll answer your question in a second time, but first I need to point out your logical inconsistency. Oh, that's what it was. I had answered his red car question, and that was in the response that got deleted. I'm like, I used a direct analogy to show how not being convinced of one prong of a true dichotomy, either X or not X, does not logically entail that you are convinced of the other prong. Like, you agreed to this. You told me that you neither believe that the number of galaxies is even, nor that it's odd. So, like, I'm neither convinced that some God exists, nor am I convinced that no God exists. And I'm like, look, it's directly analogous. If it's not directly analogous, then you can show me where it isn't. Because, like, I even spell it out here. Even is to exist, as odd is to not exist. And X maps onto God. So, like, X is even, God exists. X is odd, God doesn't exist. Those are the only options. It's a true dichotomy. Like, either A or B. But, like, they are separate claims. Like, there's the claim X, and then there's the negation of X. And so I explain how, like, just not thinking it's even doesn't imply thinking it's odd. And then I get to the red car thing. And he, spoiler alert, he just completely ignores all the details here. But I tell him, yes, if you told me you had a red car, then I would tentatively believe you. I would not be very confident in it until I actually had some evidence. I mean, cars are a pretty mundane claim, and I don't have any reason to think that you're intentionally lying yet. So I'd give him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I don't see how it has any relation to what we're talking about. Is he trying to analogize something? Like, why even ask this question? And I'm like, gods aren't as evidently existent as cars are, right? Like, if gods were analogous to cars, then we'd be in some kind of wacky world where there's, like, nobody's ever seen a car. We don't have car factories or anything. But there's this cult of Toyotaists that insists that Toyotas are real, and only Toyotas are real. And then you've got the Hondaists, and they insist that only Hondas are real. And you've got the Fordites insisting that only Fords are real, et cetera, et cetera. And then a whole bunch of people, like atheists, that are like, guys, nobody has ever actually shown anybody a car. You're just saying there's cars and making all these claims about them. But, like, in the world we live in, where, at least in America, like, just about everybody owns a car, and about 10% of cars are red, it's not a stretch to think, at least it's not nearly as much of a stretch to think that he has a red car as it would be to, like, think a God exists with an equal lack of evidence. I mean, at least I know cars are possible. So I explain all that to him, and then I explain how cars are not analogous to gods. And now I don't even know if it's possible that a god could exist. So I don't know what he's trying to do with the car thing. And this is where it kind of takes a turn. He responds to where I pointed out that he agreed to the logic, like, he doesn't believe the number is even, just like he doesn't believe that the number is odd. I said, you agreed to this. You told me you neither believe the number of galaxies in the universe is even nor odd. And then he says, I did not in fact agree on that. I said that this was unknowable. I believe that the number is unknowable with current access to information regarding the issue. This is different from not believing whether it is even or uneven. You intentionally led the question to make a conclusion you desired and then inferred it upon me whether I believed the number was even or odd, yes or no. In that framing, I am left to only say no, but that doesn't mean I believe that the number is neither even or odd. That is a fail on logic on your end. Like, I never said anything about believing that the number is neither even nor odd. The only number that's neither even nor odd is 0. And, like, the hypothetical was framed in a way in which x is non-zero. So obviously it's either even or it's in fact odd. But we're just talking about what he believes. And he explicitly said, no, I don't believe it's even. No, I don't believe it's odd. So I don't know if this, like, logic fail he's referring to is just a reading comprehension fail or what. And he said, earlier you were saying that if I'm not convinced a God exists, I had said that he was saying if I am not convinced a God exists, that I must necessarily be convinced that a God doesn't exist. So he responded to where I'd earlier said that he was saying that since I am not convinced a God exists, that I must necessarily be convinced that a God doesn't exist. And he says, not quite. I said that you were convinced that the evidence wasn't sufficient enough to validate the proposition, or alternatively that there is ample evidence to suggest otherwise, that the claim isn't substantiated. That's not at all what he said. But, yeah, so this was a pretty long Gish-gallop, and I ended up writing a 22,212 character, 189 line response that I then pasted in, broken into 7 parts. Because that's just how I roll. But I'll just read you his whole rambling thing, and then I'll go into the response. Most of it never posted, but honestly, I don't need a response to most of it. He was making false claims about me, and I have to correct that. So I'll just read his whole thing. Oh, another little quip from him regarding the claim about what he'd said. So this is a fine but important distinction. I thought you would have been able to spot the difference in logic. The thing is, I'm pretty sure this is the first time he's using the word proposition or validate in the entire thread. And this is not what he said. Regarding me saying either there is an even or an odd number of galaxies in a cluster that we can't see on the far side of the universe, he says not quite true either. We know that galaxies can collide with each other and form smaller or larger galaxies as a result. So if two galaxies collide, is it then two galaxies or one galaxy? Do we determine this by the end result after the galaxy is settled, pre-collision, or during the interaction itself? When two galaxies are in the middle of a collision, they're neither odd nor even. Hence the answer is, surprisingly, can be both, and the end answer usually ends up being subjective. Yeah, so just not engaging with the hypothetical. He says, this is why your dichotomy logic fails. What's dichotomy logic? Like, you failed to account for time being part of this equation and for things to be in a state of flux in which neither answer is correct. Yeah, buddy. For all non-zero integers, they are either odd or even. So he says, this is in fact my answer. The correct answer to your question is thus, yes, no, no, yes, 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 no, no, on whether the number of galaxies in the universe is even or odd. So, incoherent nonsense. It's like, alright, so luckily you gave me the benefit of the doubt and you believe I have a red car. You gave me the benefit of the doubt because cars are normal, and you've seen cars in your everyday life, and they are mentioned in your everyday life according to you, so you have no hesitation to believe the claim. That's not exactly what I said. I, in fact, told him that I was rather skeptical of the claim, that I only tentatively believed him. So here's where he was going with the car thing. And you might have already guessed it, because I guess they do something kind of like this a lot. But he's just analogizing one super common thing that we all probably own that we can go, like, buy at a dealership. Don't ever buy a car at a dealership, by the way. Like, we can't buy gods at dealerships. So he says, however, gods too are mentioned everywhere in the world. People claim to have seen them everywhere in the world during spiritual experiences. They're found everywhere in the world. And while you claim that people do not recognize other gods, that it is not entirely true, especially if we look at how Romans handled the different Egyptian, Celtic, and Greek gods. and basically syncretized them with their own deities. We see the same thing happening in Hinduism and in large parts of nearly every other religion. Again, huge mistakes in your logic can be found in your overly simplified conclusion. Like, it's, I don't know how he thinks anything's overly simplified in a simple dichotomy. He says, most Christians recognize the existence of other deities, but merely refuse to acknowledge them with that title. That's, I don't know what he thinks most Christians are, but that's a pretty heretical idea as far as everything I understand about Christianity. Like, when I was a Christian, we certainly didn't think other gods were real. That's highly unorthodox. He said, we have plenty of other people claiming interaction and experiences of the gods. Gods seem pretty universally present and accepted to be real in daily life. Yeah, sure, people accept gods to be real. Like, just because people believe the thing doesn't mean that the belief is true. Like, claiming interaction and experiences is the claim. And if you try to use that as evidence, that's just circular reasoning. He says, it is claimed that gods exist inside their own space, outside of normal human perception. There is no other space, there's just space, space-time. Like, everything that exists occupies a location and a time. It's like, and we have the same claim everywhere in the world practically. Thus we can be relatively secure that this claim is universal and well accepted. Well, yeah, no shit, it's well accepted. Like, 90% of the world's population is religious. Once upon a time, damn near 100% of the world's population thought the earth was flat. That didn't make it true. Like, he's literally just giving argumentum ad populum here. He says, so we have ample evidence all over the world that gods do in fact exist. I don't know how he got from people claiming interaction and experiences, and gods seem pretty universally present and accepted to be real in daily life, and claimed that gods exist. Same claim everywhere in the world. This claim is universal and well accepted. Well, no, the fuck, it's not universal. But yeah, he goes from claim, straight to ample evidence. So it really does seem like this guy might just be using circular reasoning, trying to use the claim to support the claim, to support the claim. It says the evidence is in fact overwhelming considering all the, I'm like, alright, here's gonna be some good stuff, right? Good evidence. Scripture, temples dedicated to them, special occurrences, whatever that means, miracle claims or something, I'm guessing. You got massive construction projects dedicated to them. Scriptures written down by those who were contacted. Yeah, just gonna beg the question there. And inspired by the gods everywhere in the world. We have testimonies of people everywhere. Like, so people write stuff about what they believe. People build temples to gods they believe in. Like, yeah, that's pretty normal. Testimonies certainly aren't helpful because, like, you can't get a murder conviction on just testimony. People can lie about things. People can genuinely be mistaken about things. He says the only difference between me believing whether he has a car or not and whether to believe in gods is whether I trust a source I'm given. Like, nah, I can't go down to the store and buy a god. but I've got a car sitting, like, right in front of my house. Yeah. So he said, "You gave faith to my claim that I have a red car. I do not, in fact, have a red car. You were mistaken, just like you're mistaken when someone tells you they had a spiritual experience." How? See, that read kind of incomprehensibly to me. I was mistaken. Just like I am mistaken when someone tells me they had a spiritual experience. Oh, because he says, rather than believing the source, you dismiss the source because it does not align with what you want to believe. So he is here projecting his own confirmation bias onto me. Anytime I notice any sort of confirmation bias, I try to cut that shit out pretty quickly. Because I know that I can be biased, and I know that biases can lead to unreliable conclusions, and I think that only accurate information has practical applications. So since I don't want to be scammed and stuff, it's pretty important to keep a lookout. So here's a part where he just starts claiming all sorts of lies about me. He says, "I just insist on discrediting the source and the evidence given, one way or another." Like, no, I don't insist on it. I genuinely examine any evidence anyone presents me for any argument or any claim. Like, the truth has nothing to fear from honest inquiry. And I don't really give a damn what the source is. It's the evidence that's important. Also, what is it with theists always pluralizing evidence into evidences? Like, do they not realize that the word evidence is singular and plural in the way that, like, moose is? Like, evidence itself isn't actually a singular thing. It refers to the totality of the body of facts that indicate something or another. So, like, evidence is a set of things. There's no such thing as evidences. I'm not normally one to, like, nitpick grammar and stuff, but this is an idiosyncrasy. This is a thing that I notice theists doing a lot. It's just one of those things that gives away, oh, this person's in a religion. He says, is this quote-unquote act of discrediting the evidences and the experiences of other humans that is the foundation of atheist belief? Like, here we are again. What the hell is atheist belief? What do you suppose I believe? Like, he seems to think that I just believe that there are no gods, that there cannot be any gods no matter what, that I'm just set on ignoring whatever evidence anyone can possibly provide. Couldn't be further from the truth. I didn't choose to become an atheist. I actually went out looking for the best evidence I could find because I wanted to be an apologist. And it turned out that not only could I not find good evidence, but I actually discovered that all the things that I already thought I knew, that I thought were good evidence, turned out to be piss poor. Like, I didn't voluntarily cease being a Christian. I was like 12 or 13 years old too, so it was pretty traumatic because I grew up in a very, very religious household. Like, super Southern Baptist, in church 3 or 4 times a week. So he says, rather than believing the people on their word, like you did with my red car, you insisted that their claims were not substantial enough. You go and look for answers to explain these phenomena elsewhere in psychology or other fields, claiming their delusions are part of a psychosis, even though you do not have any actual evidence for that either. I'm like, dude, I don't think religion is a psychosis. I do think it's a delusion. I don't think it's a mental illness. I'll be the first person to jump up and call somebody out for saying religion's a mental illness, because it's not. It's a totally normal phenomenon that evidently totally normal brains totally normally do. It's probably partly due to the fact that I don't have a totally normal brain, that I'm not religious. Like, I'm way too autistic now to probably ever be religious, barring, like, some genuine scientific evidence of something supernatural, which is, depending on the definition you're using, uh, maybe oxymoronic. But I physically can't believe a thing if I don't have solid evidence indicating that it's true. Whether I want to believe it or not is completely irrelevant. Like, if I did believe in the Christian God, I certainly wouldn't become a Christian. I think I'm very morally superior to a guy that promotes, like, slavery, rape, genocide, infanticide. But, yeah, he seems to be thinking that I'm just, what, using confirmation bias, looking for answers to, in his words, quote unquote, explain these phenomena elsewhere in psychology or other fields. I'm like, no, dude, not at all. I will tentatively accept whatever hypothesis is most supported by the evidence. If that happens to be that religion is a psychological phenomenon, because that's what the evidence indicates, then that's why I believe that. Like, it's not like I have some skin in the game with psychology or something. He says, yet, this is the part I really love, because he's gonna get how science works backwards. And bear in mind, the thing I went to college for specifically is astrophysics and theoretical physics. So he says, yet when someone tells you they found a planet in some distant part of the galaxy, you take their word for it, even though the scientist who makes the claim has never seen it either except for a dot appearing on a graph that would indicate something existing there. Like, dot on a graph. He doesn't know how this works, does he? I mean, of course he doesn't. So this is a part where I explain to him several methods of detecting exoplanets. There are plenty of science communication channels you can go watch that'll talk about those if you're interested. Long story short, I explained to him basically the eclipse method, where if a planet is, like, oriented towards us such that it eclipses its star regularly, then we can see the dimming of the starlight, and the periodicity of that dimming is how we know that it's something orbiting the star causing it. The second method would be, like, interferometry. Then there's spectroscopy, is how we know things about, like, the composition of exoplanet atmospheres, because if starlight passes, like, starlight that we know the emission spectrum of, if it passes through an atmosphere and some of that starlight from specific wavelengths gets absorbed by, say, carbon dioxide, then we'll see carbon dioxide absorption lines missing on the final spectrum, or at least the intensity of that wavelength will be decreased compared to what it normally is in that star's light. So he has no idea how that works. And the whole point here is he says, you take their word for it. Like, my former brother in Christ, no. No, the hell I do not take their word for it. The whole point of science is that you don't take anybody's word for it. Like, the whole way to level up as a scientist is by disproving your fellow scientists. That's why we have the peer review process. If somebody didn't show their work, or if they get results that can't be replicated, or if they're claiming things that aren't even evidently possible without any demonstration of possibility, like, yeah, we're going to tell them that they're bullshitting, because that's how the scientific method works. That's how it's self-correcting. So he says, in both cases, the level and requirements of evidence are astronomical, yet you trust one source and discredit the other. I'm like, no, I trust the data. You don't have any data indicating a god exists. I have plenty of data indicating that plenty of exoplanets exist. It's not analogous. It's just like the car thing again. Like, I know cars exist. I have evidence for them. I have data indicating that cars exist. So he says, you claim there's no evidence for God. That is only if you ignore all the scriptures, not evidence, and myths by every civilization on the planet, not evidence. Ignore all the building sites dedicated to worshipping the gods, not evidence. Ignore all the personal experiences of people, not evidence. You see, here's the thing. He says, so yes, if you ignore all the evidence and dismiss it, then indeed it does appear gods do not exist and there is no evidence for their existence, and therefore you are indeed without belief in God. But it is not that you are without belief, it is that you are convinced by other reasons that they do not exist. So here he is, back to square one, just insisting that my position must be the negation of X, rather than not X. He says, because there's massive amounts of evidence that they do exist. You have simply dismissed every piece of evidence with one conviction or another as to why they are not substantial enough for you to be convinced. And like all these things he says are evidence. Scriptures, that's evidence that religions exist, not gods. Myths, again, evidence of religions, not gods. Building sites dedicated to worship, yeah, temples are pretty good evidence of religions, not gods. And then personal experiences, like, I can't even engage with personal experiences. I can't validate them. I can't disconfirm them. I can't repeat them or test them in any way. And I know for a fact that people can genuinely be wrong while not knowing that they're wrong, that they can misattribute causes to phenomena. We've got something like 4,000 religions currently practiced on Earth. So at the very least, if they're all mutually exclusive, that means 3,999 of them are misattributing things. And they could all be misattributing things. Like all these things that he claims are evidence. Like, my guy, Brutus, hear me, brother. I cannot engage with these. You're giving me evidence of religions. You're not giving me evidence of gods. How am I supposed to see a temple that somebody built because they were convinced that a god exists, and then conclude that the god actually exists? Like, should I conclude that the earth is flat merely because lots and lots of people used to think the earth is flat? So he says, that is your actual belief. It is based on not trusting the evidence or discrediting the evidence. However, the source can be legitimate and the discrediting convictions can be false. You not believing the source and your convictions are all based on faith that your conclusions are correct. Like, dude, what conclusions? Like, evidence either stands or, like, evidence is a body of facts that indicates one hypothesis over another hypothesis. So let's look at these facts you listed one more time. We've got scripture. That's consistent with religion existing, which could be consistent with a god existing. So that doesn't tell us which one is actually the case. So we can throw out scripture. It's consistent with both. Then the next thing was what, building sites, like temples and stuff. Once again, temples are consistent with either religion or consistent with religion and an actual god. Just having a temple doesn't tell us which one is actually the case. So we can throw that out. It's not evidence. It doesn't indicate one over the other. It is consistent with both hypotheses. Same with personal experiences. All sorts of people have all kinds of personal experiences. whether they think they have personal experiences with a God when it was actually something else, or if they actually had experiences with a God. I don't have any way to tell the difference, so it's not evidence for one or the other. Throw it all out. It doesn't help me to become convinced that gods are real. That's why it's not good evidence. And the reason it's not evidence at all is that it's not inconsistent with one of the hypotheses. It's not more consistent with one hypothesis than the other. And here's the part where I tried to paste a 7-part response containing about 22,000 words. But I mean, I pretty much just covered everything that's in there, so I'm not going to bother reading it. I've still got it here. There was one thing, actually. Brutus, I want you to know this part, man. You said most Christians recognize the existence of other deities. Isaiah 43:10. You are my witness, declares the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe and understand that I am He. Before me no God was formed, nor shall there be any after me. Isaiah 45:5. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. 1 Corinthians 8:6. Yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things, and for whom we exist, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we exist. Ephesians 4:4-6. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all. Yada yada. Jeremiah 10:2-5. Learn not the way of the nations, nor be dismayed at the signs of the heavens, because the nations are dismayed at them. For the customs of the peoples are vanity. A tree from the forest is cut down and worked with an axe by the hands of a craftsman. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with hammer and nails so that it cannot move. Their idols are like scarecrows in a cucumber field, and they cannot speak. They have to be carried, for they cannot walk. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil. Neither is it in them to do good. Like, their idols are like scarecrows in a cucumber field. Doesn't sound like real gods to me. John 17 says that they know you, the only true God. Deuteronomy chapter 32. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. Again, doesn't sound like real gods. Demons that were no gods, gods they had never known. 1 Chronicles 16. For all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. John chapter 1 says, no one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. So, like, Bible pretty clearly says that there's one God. Like, yeah, we know Judaism used to be a polytheistic branch of the Canaanite pantheon. Yahweh was originally from the Canaanite pantheon, and then later got merged with El to become... Oh, there was Yahweh, and there was, what, Al Shaddai, the volcano god, and eventually they sort of got merged. El was adopted, like, basically merged with Yahweh, El being the principal, like, father god of the Canaanite pantheon. And then Judaism went through a sort of henotheistic phase, where they started just worshipping Yahweh and not any of the other deities. Although there was a brief time when there was like a northern Judaism and a southern Judaism, and only one of them was a Yahwehist sect. And then after the Babylonian captivity, Judaism eventually became monotheistic. Like, as far as Christianity goes, I mean, Christians chime in, but, like, let me know in the comments, if you're a Christian, do you think other gods are actually real? Do most Christians think other gods are actually real? Yeah. I mean, I've been talking to this guy for a couple of days, and it wasn't going anywhere. So eventually I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna make a video response. So here's the video response. Let's open up the old Photoshop here. And I'm going to draw a logic square to explain the concept that he's just not getting. Okay. So here we have God on this axis and existence on this axis. So there's the yes, there's the no. So the possibilities are that God exists, in which case I affirm the proposition God exists, or that God does not exist. I can affirm the proposition that God does not exist. See, this is the proposition God does exist, and this is its negation. God does not exist. Because it's a true dichotomy, God can either exist or not exist. Then it must be one or the other in actual fact. However, there is a difference between the ontology, that is, what is actually the case, and epistemology, which is basically how we know what we know. So, like, these are the logical possibilities. There's either a God or there's not a God. Just like x is even, where x is any number other than 0. Okay, forget about the galaxies, dudes. We don't need to split hairs about how to count galaxies. We're not actually counting galaxies. It's a hypothetical, just discussing how numbers work, like how logic works, right? So there's two possibilities for the proposition x is even. It's either true that x is even, just like it could be true that God exists, or alternatively, it could be false that x is even, right? And you got two possibilities here. It's like, God exists is either true or false, x is even is either true or false. They're one-to-one directly analogous. You can just replace the claim God exists with the claim x is even, and the possibilities are true or false. But if I don't know which one it is, then I'm not going to affirm one. Like, I don't know that God does exist. That doesn't necessarily entail that I think God does not exist. Now, granted, if we're talking about a specific God, like if we're talking about the Christian God, then most definitions of that God entail some sort of logical contradiction. And since contradictions can't actually be true, then I could pretty reasonably say that such a God does not exist. But if we're just talking in general about the basic concept of a theos, like, if we remove the big G God here and just call it a theos, which is just basically your catch-all category for any sort of interventionist God that does anything detectable in reality. Like the Christian God would be a subset of theos. Theos as in theist, atheist, right? So a theos exists, is either true or false. X is even, is either true or false. I asked you, Brutus, I asked you, do you think the number of galaxies, forget the galaxies, I asked you, do you think X is even? And you told me, no. So I then asked, do you think X is odd? And you told me, you know the answer to that already, why do you have to be so smug about it? Like, obviously no. So you don't think X is even, and you don't think X is odd. Obviously X must be either even or odd. But the point is, you don't have any reason to think it's even, any more than you have any reason to think it's odd. And in the same way, I have no more reason to think a God does exist than I have to think that no God's even a secret hiding God of hiding, like under a rock in the Andromeda Galaxy exists. It's just unfalsifiable. There's nothing I can do with it. So the ball's in your court. The burden of proof is on you to actually provide evidence for your God. But the main thing is, I want you to understand, like, very, very simply. It should be super duper simple. I'll even make it nice and simple for you. With a nice pretty font. Because I know my handwriting is atrocious. So you got right here, God exists. You got right here, X is even. And it's either true or it's false. Those are the only possibilities, right? We agree. Those are the only possibilities that the basic law of logic. You know what? I guess I better explain logic too. I've gotten to the end of recording this and just realized that he might not understand propositional logic. So there's three basic axioms. There's the law of identity. It is A is A. A thing is itself. A thing always is what it is. Pretty simple so far, right? So like, God. God is God. X is X. Even is even. This is the first law of logic. The second law of logic, that's the law of identity, by the way. I don't know if I told you, the law of identity is the first law of propositional logic. The second law of propositional logic is the law of non-contradiction. And that basically means P is not P. A thing is not what it is not. Like, first law is a thing is what it is, second law is a thing isn't what it isn't. Following so far? And the third law is called the law of excluded middle. And what that basically means is that for any truth value, that truth value is either true or false, that there's no middle ground, that a thing cannot simultaneously be what it is and what it isn't. Because otherwise, you could satisfy both the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction, and create, paradoxes without the law of excluded middle. So together, these three laws are the basics that all propositional logic is built on top of. So here's our logic square. God exists is either true or false. X is even for all non-zero x's. Is either true or it's false. So if I don't think x is even is false, that doesn't mean that I think it's true. If I don't think God exists is true, then that doesn't mean that I think it's false. It really is that simple. Like, I can't break it down any more simply than that. I don't know what X is. I don't know if God exists. It doesn't seem like God exists. Like, things that don't exist don't leave evidence, And it certainly seems like you don't actually have any evidence to provide. Like, what evidence could you provide to prove that the tooth fairy doesn't exist? It's like the same thing with God. So, like, it doesn't have to be that complicated. Just basic logic. Either the thing exists or the thing doesn't exist. X is even or X is not even. Those are the logical possibilities. But if I don't know, then that doesn't force me to just pick one. If I don't know, then I don't know. I'm not going to claim God does exist because I don't have a reason to think that that's true. Just like I'm not going to claim that no gods exist because I can't possibly scour the whole universe and gain the totality of all knowledge to be able to rule that out. It's just a logical impossibility. But I do think your God is false. I don't think the Christian God is real. And if you want to talk about that, we can talk about that in as much detail as you'd like. Although, honestly, if you still don't get the difference between notX and Xnot, then I don't think we actually can have a conversation. So, I know this has been probably about an hour or so. It was a rather lengthy exchange, and that last thing from Brutus did have a whole lot to unpack in it. And I'm not going to be the kind to skip unpacking something like that when it contains a lot of assertions about me. Like, dude, if you want people to take you seriously, you gotta stop lying to them about them. Because they're obviously going to recognize when you're lying to them about them. Like, you're not a mind reader, and if you are, your Bible says we're supposed to put you to death by stoning you. So unless you're a mind reader, you have no way to know what's inside my mind other than what I tell you. And that's about the gist of it, really. Just don't fucking go telling people what's inside their mind when you don't know. You know? I don't tell you what you think. That was the whole point of asking you what you think. So, if you are a troll, props to you, absolutely. You flew under the radar. I thought you were a real Christian the whole time. I'm not, obviously I'm not super confident in that, but Poe's law seems to hold true pretty well. Like, a lot of the Christians that I think would be trolls actually turn out to actually be Christians that genuinely believe the things that they're saying. So, Once again, I know it bit me last time. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and assume that you're being genuine and not a troll. So if you would like to genuinely engage with this, then by all means, Brutus, hit me up in the comments, whatever, let me know. Let's actually talk about it. Let's actually have a pointed conversation where we stay on topic. Keep the focus narrow. Don't just say 24 different things and then have me feeling like I need to go respond to all of them. You claimed a couple of times that I had made logic fails in your words, but you never actually articulated the first thing about how any logic works or any failures I might have made with the logic. So, yeah, let me know. If I'm wrong about something, you can show it. I'll be the first one to admit I'm wrong and change my mind. And I mean, it's a religious obligation of yours to try to convert people to your religion, right? The Great Commission and all that. So hit me up. Let me know. If you're onto something, I'd really like to know about it. But I don't mean this to be in any way disrespectful, but I genuinely mean this, dude. You are doing more harm to your religion by your rhetorical style and by the things that you're actually, the substantive things you're actually saying. You're doing more harm to your religion than you're doing good for it. And if you're not a troll, if that's something you actually care about, please take this as constructive criticism. I think everybody should have the best reasons to believe everything they believe. I don't want to see anybody get scammed. I think accurate information is the only kind of information that consistently has practical applications. I'd prefer we all be right about as many things and wrong about as few things as possible. I hope you care about the truth as much as I do. And if you really think you have something to show me, you kept saying you have evidence, but you kept providing things that not only weren't good evidence, but actually weren't evidence. If you want to have a conversation about that, I would be more than happy to. I've spent the better part of 30 years trying to find the best possible reasons to believe in Christianity in particular and, religion or supernatural things in general as I possibly can. And, here's your opportunity. I'm genuinely searching. I'm what they call what's the term? A non-resistant non-believer. If you can show me evidence for something, if it's reasonable to be convinced by the evidence, then I will not be able to not be convinced by the evidence. So let me know. Hit me up, dude. I enjoyed our conversation, Brutus, even though it didn't really go very far. I really hope drawing the picture helps. I really, really do. This is the exhaustive list of all the possibilities, right? Either God exists or God doesn't exist. For any number x that's non-zero, it's either true that it's even, or it's false that it's even. It's either true that God exists or it's false that God exists. I don't know. I'm not the one claiming to know anything about this. You're the only one claiming to know something about this. And yet everything you provide, when you say you claim to know these things, isn't even evidence of the things, of the thing you're trying to prove. So maybe it would be good to think about, what's your number one best piece of evidence? Your very best one. Is there a smoking gun that just proves that God exists, or is it all just feelings and, well, people have religions and people believe things, so, if lots of people believe them, then they've got to be true, right? Because we know that's not how the world works. People are fooled about stuff all the time. Like, the whole thing is, I don't want to be fooled. I hope you don't want to be fooled. Um, Obviously, we currently have different conclusions. But I think the difference is, and I think it can be objectively shown to be true, that I can clearly articulate why I am or am not convinced of things, and you're just projecting a whole bunch of untrue crap onto me, like pretending it's true, misrepresenting my position, claiming I take positions that I don't have, and not even understanding like basic logic. Like, this claim is X, right? So the false part right here is not X. Okay? Or, sorry. The yeah. All right, so this claim here, one last time, just to be absolutely clear about this, all right? This claim, God exists, is claim X, all right? So in logic, if I say X is true, I'm saying it is true that God exists. This right here is the negation of X, all right? The negation of X is called Xnot. X is over here, God exists. X not over here, God does not exist. Now, for any position that is not specifically this right here, for any position that is not X, any other position, it's like anything that does not include accepting that God exists is true, that would be called not X, because it's, ta-da, not X. So X not is actually a subcategory of not X. Not X encompasses everything except the claim X. X not specifically is the claim that negates X. Hopefully I've made that all clear. So, to make it absolutely unequivocally clear, my claim is not X not. My claim is not X. I do not have the position that God exists is true. That does not mean that I necessarily have the position that God exists is false. That just means that I do not have the position that God is true. I think I've said this about every way I can possibly say it. I've literally drawn pictures. If you don't get it from here, I don't know what to tell you. Just go online. I'm sure a bunch of universities have a Logic 101 class, like with public coursework online. You could just probably ask your local community college or university if they'd allow you to audit a logic class. I get that it's not taught as much as it should be in high school. Like, a lot of people make it to adulthood without actually understanding identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. Um, That's about all I can say about that. I mean, if you've got any specific questions at this point, if you've got any pushback on anything in particular that I said, like, let me know. But please try to keep it pointed, concise, direct, like on topic, as specific as you can be. Because I love having these conversations. I love talking about this stuff. I really hate when they turn into non-versations. But honestly, Brutus, I feel like that's what happened here. I feel like we tried to have a conversation, and then it just turned into a non-versation, and I was trying my damnedest. So I don't know if you just genuinely don't grasp the logic, if you were being intentionally obtuse, if you're a troll, if your emotions are too tied up in your religion so you can't treat the God claim the same way you treat the X claim. I think it might be that last one because you did acknowledge that you don't think X is true, or you don't think X is even, and you don't think X is odd. So, like, I don't understand why you can't comprehend that I don't think it's true that God exists. Just like I don't think it's true that God doesn't exist. So if you still don't get it, I don't know, man. I don't know what to tell you. You literally prompted me. I've had this second channel set up for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that now. And you've literally been the first one to actually prompt me to be like, okay, fuck it, I'm just gonna make a video response. So kudos for that. I guess I appreciate it. You know, content's content. But honestly, it's not about that. I hate when people lie to me about me. I don't do that. I will not lie to you about you. So if I'm going to show you the respect of not lying to you about you, it's really fucking weird when someone tries to lie to me about me because like what, do you think I can't just check my own mind to see what's going on in there? Do you really think that I'm going to believe that you have better access to my mind than I do? It doesn't make any sense. Like pretty much everything you said about my epistemology was fundamentally wrong. Like not just wrong, but like fractally wrong. Wrong at every conceivable scale and resolution. Oh, I hope I've been able to explain that. Anywho, I guess that's about all for right now. So let me know. Let me know if you got any thoughts. Christians especially, if you see this, chime in. Let me know. Do you guys actually believe that other gods exist? Because I used to be a Christian, and I didn't know. I figure maybe there's one or two sects. There's always one or two sects that believe whatever random thing you can come up with, right? As many as there are. But like that's highly heretical in most, orthodox forms of Christianity, is it not? Like in Protestantism and Catholicism in general. Anyway, let me know. This channel is going to be for, yeah, basically just critiquing, talking about conversations that I either participate in or happen to be witness to. Like a lot of them are non-versations, and it's cringy and weird, but I feel like it's important to point that out. At the end of the day, we've only got two tools to influence each other. We've got words and we've got violence. And I know which one I prefer. So, anyway, if you're still watching, appreciate it. Hope you have a good one. Like, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll be trying to get some of these out as I can manage. Yeah, I do have a real life and all that stuff, but I'm also kind of autistic with some compulsive tendencies. And apparently, since I grew up atheist and have always been interested in thinking about thinking and like the different ways that people can be wrong while thinking they're right, uh, I've always been interested in this stuff. It's, I don't know if it's fair to call it a hobby, but I spend a lot of time trying to seek out conversations about like philosophy and religion in general. No. If you got any thoughts, let me know in the comments. I'll respond to every last one of them. You know, unless you just show up to call me names or something, and hell, I'll probably still respond to those too. So, let me know. Till next time, y'all have a good one. This has been Conversations and Nonversations, and we'll see if Brutus actually wants to engage from here, but honestly, it seems like we had a conversation on our hands. And that's a shame. I do love a good conversation. Well, better luck next time.